Good afternoon. Greetings, peace, and power. This is another session of our six-part series on preparation for reparation. Reparations, as we look at it, the doctors, and on screen now is Dr. Clyde Winters, our most esteemed doctor in the research and has on indigenous studies. He's an anthropologist, linguist, speaks about 10 different languages. He has been in the field, he's a professor, he's been in the field for maybe 20 plus years. He is our most esteemed scholar. His research and those other doctors that have given us fantastic research, Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Barry Fell, Wolfenthal, Dr. David M. Hotep, so many others have confirmed it. But this is the father of the research. This is our expert, and I'm so glad to have him on today. We're going to talk about reparations and from an indigenous perspective, and because our research, his research, as well as those other doctors' research and our research has uncovered the fact that we are indigenous people, that we have been in the Americas for centuries. And we have the artifacts, we have the evidence, and I'm going to bring Dr. Winters on, and he'll be able to elucidate and give you information that you've never had before. And we're going to bring it on home to explain to you how this is the process of how Native people, indigenous people, colonized people obtain reparations. So I'm so glad to have him, and I'm going to bring him on. His microphone is on, and I am going to beg off. And Dr. Winters?
Hello, everybody.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. What I want to talk about today is this whole idea of reparations, but in relationship to our indigenous origins or indigenous reality. One of the things that you have to understand is that when you go before the United Nations or other courts to prove your indigenous status, you have to come from a cultural approach, and you also have to show that you have a spiritual relationship with the ancestral territory. That's a very difficult thing in relationship to African descendants, because of the fact that the Europeans, the way they conducted their relationship with us is very different from how they conducted their relationship with the Mongoloid Indians. First of all, it's important to understand that African people have been coming to the United States for over 130,000 years. The earliest evidence of man in North America dates back to 130,000 years ago in California. And what we know is that these people had to have come from Africa because of the fact that we don't have any ancient hominids in the Americas dating earlier than maybe 10 or 40 or 30,000 years ago. Also, we know that the Ice Age made it impossible for man to walk from Asia into the United States. Secondly, you could not come to the United States by a land route by an ocean route, because of the fact that there was ice around the coast of the United States because of the Ice Age that existed here. So for at least 100,000 years we've been here. But when we focus on North America, our home, we find in a sense that the earliest evidence of man in North America dates back only to about 15,000 years ago, except for the evidence of some mastodon bones in California 30,000 years ago. I don't want to get people confused. But let's talk about this whole idea of indigenous origins. When you talk about indigenous origins, you have to look at the tribes. And so when the Europeans came here, the European found black people. As a result, they called the people they found in the Americas Indians. And the reason they called them Indians is because of the fact that they were black, just like the Indians that they found or they were trading with in South India. It's very important to understand this. Many Europeans, they try to pretend as though, he was on his way to India, so he said that they were Indians because he thought he was an Indian. No, he knew he wasn't in India because of the fact that you have to understand that African people have been trading back and forth with the United States for hundreds of years before the Europeans got here. In fact, the Europeans did not come here, Columbus and the rest of them, they came here with maps. And these maps they got from African people. These maps were made because of the fact that many of us assume that the European has ruled the world for the last 5,000 years. No. Europeans were ruled by black people in Spain up to 1492. In other words, the same year that Columbus discovered America was the year that the Moors were forced out of Spain. Prior to 1492, there was constant interaction between black people, African people in the Americas, and African people in Africa. Columbus had maps. He knew that he was going to reach a land. This was not all hypothetical. You can read all of the texts of the Spanish explorers when they came here. When the Spanish explorers came here, they had interpreters. And all these interpreters were black. How could you have an interpreter interpreting the Indian language unless they already were speaking the language prior to coming over here? But see, that's another one of the myths. But it's very important to understand this because when you understand that when Columbus came here, he found black people, he found African people, and he called these people Indians not because he thought he was an Indian. He called them Indians because they were black, just like the South Indians. And so we find that the first Indians that the Europeans encountered in the Caribbean and the Indians that they encountered when they landed on the North American shore were of black tribes. In fact, black tribes, black Native American Indians, they dominated the United States from Canada in the east all the way down to Florida. And they also had extensive black Indian nations from the eastern shore to the Midwest. And then we also had a lot of black people in Canada and West Canada, Oregon, Washington, and stuff like that. Because we find that most of the Mongoloid Indians, they began in a sense to migrate from the southwest across into the eastern lands, Midwest, and others. Okay, when these Mongoloid Indians came, what they did in a sense is that they became affiliated with many of the black Native American tribes. You see, and what happened is that you often, when you look at the relationship, you often have Mongoloid tribes and African tribes that have the same names, and that's because of the fact that these Mongoloid Indians have been adopted. You see, and so this is one of the things that caused one of the problems, and that really makes it very difficult when you're talking about a cultural approach and possession of a social and cultural and economic character that's different from the rest of society. Because when you go before the court to try to fight to get our reparations, we have to prove that we possessed a social, cultural, and economic character that was different from the rest of the society. Now, this is the kicker, and this is where you have to be very careful, and why we need a little bit more research, is that we know that when the European came here, they decided right away that they were going to deal with the black Indians different from the Mongoloid Indians that they met later. The first thing they did with the black Indians is that they asked to come and share their land. And then after they came to share their land, They would often, in a sense, invite them to gatherings and parties and things like that. And then they would enslave them. And so we find that many of the black nations, their land was stolen after a war with Europeans. And after these wars with Europeans, most of them were sold into slavery. The main slave port for these black Native Americans was Barbados, you see. But the thing they did is that they would mainly send the men and keep the women. For example, you hear a lot about the first Thanksgiving. They never talk about the second Thanksgiving. Because during the second Thanksgiving, when the black Native Americans came to sit down and share a meal with the Europeans, they were poisoned. And those that weren't poisoned were set upon, murdered while they ate. Yes, murdered. And those that weren't murdered, they captured them and sold them to Barbados, you see. Our interactions with Europeans has been an interaction which has always been deadly. And because of the fact that this relationship has been one of war and deceit, it makes it difficult for some people to really understand our relationship. Because they never really wanted to allow us to express our native or indigenous character. They always wanted to identify us as simply blacks because of their confrontations with blacks in Europe. You see, Europeans have a long hatred for black people. And one of the reasons they have a long hatred for us is that we ruled them for so many years. Yes. The first black people went into Europe in 700 AD. These Muslims came from Senegal. Do you know where Senegal is? It's in West Africa. These black people came from Senegal in 711, and they stormed into Iberia or Spain or what we call Portugal, and they conquered these lands. And when they conquered these lands, what they did is that they expanded these black territories all the way from Iberia into Germany. Yes. Yes. This is where they gained their hatred of us. Because they hated the fact that we practiced a superior culture. And this superior culture was one that made them become jealous and afraid of us. As these black people, in a sense, continue to rule in Spain and Portugal, because of the fact that there had been a relationship between Africans in Africa and Africans in North America, some Europeans began to discover that there was a new land. But this wasn't exactly a new land. They knew the land existed. They knew they were already trading with blacks. I mean, even when Columbus came to America, he mentions these black people moving up and down the coast selling tobacco. Yes. There is no mystery. The only mystery that black people are not indigenous to the Americas is the fact that they hide this history from you. They've hid this history from us to make us live in a dream state. Yes. It's almost as though we didn't really exist. But when you hear about the various tribes, the Yamasis, and other black tribes in North America, we always hear about these people during the process of confrontation. Okay, but let's look at this idea. Whenever you approach the government for reparations, you have to show how your social, your cultural, and economic character is different from the rest of the society. This makes it very difficult for us because American society has been constructed off an African, black, Native American, indigenous culture. The foods that they eat in America, they got it from us. The music they play, they got it from us. You see? It came from our indigenous nature. But the European denies that we are indigenous because of the fact that they want to claim that everybody came here from Africa. And granted, at least about 10 or 20 million sub-Saharan slaves came to the Americas from Africa. But when they came to the Americas, African people were already here. And what made it so bad is that, as I told you, as early as the second Thanksgiving, black people were being enslaved on the plantation. You see? They saw Indians growing tobacco, so they said, we're going to grow tobacco, but we're lazy, so we're going to have somebody else do it. So you know what they did? They took those black Native Americans and they put them on the plantations. You can go right now. After this talk, I want you to go Google tobacco and growing tobacco and the slaves and on the plantations and in the tobacco fields. And you're going to see black Native Americans. They were the image of these tobacco plantations, you see. Because of the fact that they learned to grow their crops from these black Native Americans. You know, when I was growing up, my father, he was from Mississippi. And I love my old man. I miss him every day. Like any other trip problems. But my old man always tried to teach me two things. He tried to teach me how to hunt, and he tried to teach me how to be a farmer. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't too much of the farmer, and I'm not too good with guns. But you know, every Saturday, my father, when I was growing up, he'd take us out into the suburban areas of Chicago, and he would grow squash, beans, and corn, and tomatoes also. And at the end of around August, he'd go and collect all this, plus some little okra, and we'd come back, and we'd take it home, and my mother would can the tomatoes, and we would have the tomatoes all throughout the year. We'd have the corn and stuff. But I didn't even know at that time, because see, my parents had all, my mother and grandmother always taught me that we were part Choctaw. But I didn't really worry about being part Choctaw because I was just a nigger at school. But the point is that my father grew squash, he grew corn, and he grew beans. And do you know what those things are? That is the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is the name of the plants that black Native Americans grew: corn, squash, and beans. And there it was that growing up, that's what my father taught me, that you're supposed to grow. You see? He still had this connection to the land that our forebears had before the European got here. And he carried that on when he came up here to the north, you see? Because that part of Mississippi that we came from was mainly Choctaw territory. And his ancestors, I gotta look it up. And my father's father was brought there by the Winters family, Vitor. But he still picked up the Choctaw stuff, I guess, from my grandmother and mother's side of the family. But again, as I said, that shows that that's a cultural tradition. That shows a relationship that we had with the land, and we continue to have that relationship with the land. That is unique to African people. White people, when you go to a white farm, white people are cultivating what's the most popular crop that they can sell. When they first got here, they said they could sell tobacco, so they grew tobacco. Later they grew rice, and then finally they grew cotton. But due to my indigenous heritage and your indigenous heritage, our people continued to grow what they had grown for millennia. And that was corn, squash, and beans. That's a cultural tradition that we have. Very important. Could you show the slide from Seneca Village?
Okay. It is the top one. That is that's the New York one? Okay.
Yes.
All right. That should be... Oh, I have it labeled Seneca Village. Yes. I'm going to download it for everyone to see it. So everyone should be able to see the Seneca Village slides. If you don't, you should have it on your computer as a download that we just sent. So bring that up, audience, if you have that slide. This is the Seneca Village slide. Go ahead, Dr. Winters.
Okay, well, this is Seneca Village. Many people don't know that Seneca Village was a village that was occupied by black Seneca Indians. There was also a few Europeans that moved into the area, and there was also some ex-slaves in the area. But it was a village that was formed by black Seneca Indians. But if you Google Seneca Indians today, they're not going to show you one black person. You see, because they refused to acknowledge their Indian heritage. You see, I had a Mongoloid Indian brother talking about, hey, what about the treaties? Palefaces didn't make any treaties with black Native Americans. When you lived in an area, they just took it. That's what they did to Seneca Village. This was a town that black Seneca Indians had lived in for hundreds of years. And they took it away. And when they took it away, these people had nowhere else to live except in maybe other ghettos in what we call New York City, Manhattan today. See? You have to understand this. Is that the European has constantly been trying to take away our connections to the land. But luckily, when you study history and when you investigate it, you begin to see that we did have these connections, but the Europeans, they severed these connections and just said, hey, you're not a Native American, you're a colored person. You're a colored person. And they use this whole idea of colored person to be able, in a sense, to make it appear that indigenous black people had no connection to the land. They were just a bunch of colored people from Africa. And this is important, you see. Could you put up the slide of Chappaquiddick?
Yes.
Martha Vineyards?
Okay, that should be... Okay, audience, that I'm going to put up that slide. That should be Clyde 2. Okay. All right, audience, I'm downloading that slide for you, and you should have that. And that's of Martha Village, the Chappaquiddick Indians. Go ahead.
Okay. You always hear about all the big shots going, the Kennedys, that young singer. They're always going to Martha Vineyard. That's where the rich folks hang out. But that wasn't always the playground of the rich. That was a black Native American community. But again, when the Europeans saw that they were having a beautiful location, a fine place to live, the Europeans just took it over. Just like they took over Seneca Village. You see? They never acknowledged that these people were black Native Americans, because if they acknowledged that they were black Native Americans, they would have had to, in a sense, pay them money. But they have always felt they don't have to pay us anything. But that's why we're going to make sure that they cut the check and give us back the land. You see? Because you can't keep getting away with this. No, we're not going to. There's some treaties, and we're going to do some research to get those confirmed too. But the relationship that we've usually had with Europeans in relation to what was our land is they just took it. They didn't try to they didn't try to buy a lease, you see? And so then it's very difficult to really show that we retain legal title. That's why most of our conflict in the courts is going to be based upon this whole idea that who was there first and when did they take it, you see? And so when an Indian comes up to you and when a Mongoloid Indian comes up to you and say, well, where's the treaties? There were no treaties, but that was our land. And we're going to get it back. So we see in a sense is that if you're going to look at indigenous jurisprudence, you have to look at it from the perspective of the relationship that Europeans had with the African descendants, you see, in the Americas, as opposed to the others. So we do have a spiritual relationship to the ancestral territory. You see, even up to this day, there's many people in New York City who tell you that their ancestors lived in Seneca Village. You see, my family has always taught us that we were Choctaw. You You see? Bill Gates of Harvard University, he's made a big deal about, my parents said they were Indians, but the genetics showed that I have white ancestry. He's a fool. And you know why he's a fool? He never did the research himself, but he would know that the R haplogroup is an African haplogroup. And in fact, most of the haplogroups carried by Europeans are African haplogroups. But they play a trick with you if you don't study it. And that's why I study, and that's why we're going to do more research. Okay, the second thing in a sense is that you constantly see, and hopefully they'll put up the slide that shows the increase in the free slave the free black population.
Okay.
What you see throughout the
you want to put that up?
Yes, put that up, please.
Okay. All right. I'm putting this up for our audience. This is Clyde. Must be Clyde 2. Okay. All right. I've done that, and I've downloaded it for everyone so that you should be able to see it or bring it up. Go ahead, Dr. Winters, please.
Okay. Look at these totals. Look how the increases. They almost would double. They would almost double within a few years. And the reason that they doubled is that every time they would take away land from indigenous black people, from our black Native American ancestors, they would just label them free blacks or colored folk, their favorite term, and then just toss it away. But no, that was our land they took. Our ancestors deserve a right to get that land back. We do have an ancestral relationship to the land, and that's one of the reasons why my father, now he's with God on the other side, but my father, that's why he taught me about our indigenous culture. When he taught me, if you're supposed to grow maize, squash, and beans, because those things will help you to survive. They were a natural diet. And this was our ancestral diet as indigenous Africans in America. So, to sum things up, we do have a spiritual relationship with our ancestral territories. Granted, we were forced during slavery off of our lands into colored communities, or we were on the plantation. Remember, the slaves on the plantations, when they caught a black Indian, they took that black Indian and put him on the plantation. That's why so many of us have this African indigenous ancestry, because of the fact that many of our ancestors made it on those plantations. You see? This culture that we call the United States culture is our culture. The music. You don't see Europeans eating chicken except from over here, and they got it from us. You see? Corn. Okra. See? Yes, we have a culture, but our culture has been taken away from us just like our land was taken away from us. And Europeans have begun to call our culture, our land, theirs, when it's not. And we can prove it, and we're going to prove it. We're going to prove it because we have the research now, the genetic research, the historical research. We got to clear it up. We got to clean it up, and we got to get more, and we're going to do that if we can get support from those people who want to see our true and our actual history. We were not always slaves. This was our land. Have you ever wondered why the European hates us so much? Haven't you ever wondered why he doesn't feel sorry that he brought all these people from Africa? And he put them on a plantation, and he beat them, and he whipped them. You see? He doesn't feel sorry for you because he knows, yes, millions of us came from Africa. But the vast majority of us were indigenous. And because he knows you're indigenous, every time he looks at you, he knows that he owes you. He owes you for the land he's taken. You see? And because he owes us reparations, he's going to play that Africa thing up forever so you can go back to Africa. Why the hell should I go back to Africa? My ancestors were also indigenous here. We came from Africa, and do you know what? That's my ancestral home. Africa is my ancestral home. Africa is where the ancient ancestors came from. But my heritage is indigenous American. We were here first, and we will be here in the end. Did you have any questions, Doctor?
Well,